You know, I used to think that the greatest threat to humanity was a global pandemic, or nuclear war, or climate change. You know, stuff that could wipe out a big chunk of us humans and leave the rest of us to pick up the pieces. But now I'm not so sure. Now I think the biggest threat to humanity is actually our imagination. I know that sounds kind of weird, but let me explain. A few years ago, a group of scientists at a university in Switzerland were trying to come up with a way to measure how creative we are as humans. They wanted to quantify creativity so they could study it, understand it better. So they had people take a test where they were shown a series of ambiguous shapes and asked to describe what they saw. And then they analyzed the descriptions for originality, flexibility, and fluency. Basically how creative people were in coming up with unusual and appropriate descriptions for the shapes. And while this was going on, they also monitored the brain activity of the test subjects using an MRI machine. What they found was that the more creative a person's response was, the more activity there was in the part of the brain associated with the sense of self, the prefrontal cortex. In other words, the more we ruminate over our own thoughts and feelings, the more creative we can be. Now, you might be thinking, what does this have to do with the threat to humanity? Well, here's what I'm getting at. We humans have the unique ability to imagine things that don't exist, to think about things that are outside of our immediate experience. And when we do this, when we use our prefrontal cortex to ruminate over our thoughts and feelings, and the thoughts and feelings of others, we can come up with all sorts of novel and interesting ideas. Ideas like, oh, I don't know, how to make a really cool video about a bunch of apes who go on a rampage in a zoo and kill everyone. Or how about this one? How to create a deadly virus that can withstand the effects of modern medicine. Or maybe, just maybe, how to build a bomb that can be small enough to fit in a man's shoe. The point is, we humans have the unique ability to imagine all sorts of terrible things that could happen, and then we can plan for them and prepare. We can come up with all sorts of ways to make sure that the worst things that could happen don't actually happen. That's why I think the biggest threat to humanity is our imagination, because when we use it to imagine all the terrible things that could happen, we can then spend our time and energy worrying about those things, instead of focusing on the things that actually are happening. It's like we're always looking for the worst case scenario, and then making sure that it does not happen. Of course, there are times when this is a good thing. Like if we didn't have the ability to imagine things that could go wrong, we probably wouldn't take the precautions necessary to prevent them from actually going wrong. But I think that in general, we spend way too much time imagining all the terrible things that could happen, and not enough time focusing on the good stuff. So next time you find yourself worrying about something that might happen in the future, ask yourself, would I rather be worrying about this, or would I rather be doing something else? Because ultimately, life is too short to worry about things that might not happen. Okay, thanks. Bye.